Hi, everybody. My name is Stephanie Musat, and I'm here to talk about how to kill your product, which I know sounds ruthless and aggressive and maybe even evil or soulless, but I'm here to tell you that killing off your product is probably the most generous and kindest thing you can do for not only your users, your team, but your product that you're probably not doing enough of now. And before we get into it, let's take a step back and talk about the very definition of what we are supposed to do as product managers. Two sides of the same coin here. We build the right thing, meaning we have a deep understanding of the user problems that we can relate to, their motivations, their obstacles to such a degree that we design and develop an elegant, delightful experience, which is the build the right thing part of this. Now, this is great in theory, but in reality, we might be in a case where we build the right thing since we know the user problem, but we just don't architect it correctly. Or we build a lovely product for a non-existent problem. Or perhaps realistically, we totally mess up because our boss's boss comes to us with this idea that they claim is brilliant. And we sit down and we build it because we don't want to get fired. And next thing you know, you've built, I don't know, half a dozen chat bots in 2017 because that was the cool thing to do at the time. And people really thought that we were going to be a pioneer in the space. But you know what? In your head, you're just kind of nodding along, realizing it's not going to work. In any of these scenarios, we're faced with some pretty hard truths and some hard choices that come down to the fact that somewhere, somehow along the line, we made the wrong decision that led us to develop something that is just not in the best interest of our users, our business, or the product. And this is not happening just by us. This is a thing that is across the entire software development sphere. Several years ago, the Standards Group tried to quantify this, the overall impact of software development, and found that within existing products, about 20% of features enable 80% of engagement. But perhaps more shocking is that 50% are rarely used. This was done several years ago, so I'd hedge a bet that these percentages have grown even more extreme today as the industry has expanded to things around blockchain and NFT, all these experimental moments, and we are participating in the build trap. So why do we do this to ourselves? Well, half the time it's because we want to participate and be innovators, but what that leads us to tends to be a Frankenstein of products that are half-baked ideas that we never really took off because of a variety of reasons. And so why do we sit ourselves in this space? Well, it tends to come down to really three reasons, of which we will go through right now. First off, we are humans. We really do try to do the best for our work. We spend a lot of time and effort and brain power in doing what we think is right for our products, and that does create an attachment to what we work on. We spend weeks, months poring over every little detail as it gets closer to our vision. So that idea that we spend time and effort and energy on something that just didn't work is kind of gutting. You know, when I consult for companies, one of the first questions I ask is, what can we get rid of? What's holding us back? And people always say, but that's my baby. And it always makes me laugh because this is a baby, a very cute baby. This is why we do this. We go to work to get a salary to provide for our baby. Our products are not our babies. Not to say that. I'm not suggesting that we're robots when we're dealing with our products. Our profession does have a degree of empathy that we need to tap into in order to solve these intrinsic human needs. But our attachment to our own solutions that are often disguised as our own brilliance clouds the decisiveness and reason required to make good choices. Number two, so as I said, we are humans and we don't like being wrong. It's embarrassing. It makes us feel foolish. So we make up excuses why it's somebody else's fault. The market wasn't primed for this. Leadership changed priorities. Our users will get it eventually. But in a culture where everyone is right all the time and we don't admit our mistakes, that dooms us into maintaining things that aren't working and repeating the same mistake. This is Niklas Zennström. He's a Swedish entrepreneur, probably most notably known as the founder of Skype. And he captures this sentiment perfectly, where if we're not failing, we're not learning. And if we're not learning, then we're living in this fabricated reality, wasting time and money and our own sanity in most cases on things that are just not going to work. So that is why failure is important to acknowledge and do something about it. If you have a broken fridge at home, you're not just going to keep it around, put food in it, and think it will get cold. We have to be proactive in this space. And the last part is around our process. Our process by default orients us to new development. It is so much more fun to go into a demo and say, hey, look at all the new stuff we're doing. It feels like progress. Than, hey, we got rid of this thing. Isn't that great? But the problem with that is then our process focuses on short-term views of what we need to deliver right now versus what we can do to ensure long-term health and viability of our products. And as innovators and entrepreneurs and thought leaders and experimenters, all of that as product people, we're excited by the new. It's awesome. But in most cases, our users just want simple, easy, something that works. And I think oftentimes our purest intention to drive change leads to overcomplicated solutions. And my experience built on shaky architecture that has been neglected in favor of new development, and that's a very hard cycle to break. For example, I was at a company once that I was brand new and I was inheriting this sort of archaic internal tool system. And right when I first started, they said, go talk to people. I'm not going to show you the tool, go talk to people first. And I said, okay. So I went to a user, I sat down, said, hey, how are you? What do you think of this? And he said, this is the worst part of my day. That using this tool was the worst part of their day was very shocking to me. And I said, why? How can that be the case? And he sat down and opened his laptop and opened the tool. And he told me it takes 42 seconds for the thing to start. And I laughed, but he was true. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, I'm not going to sit here and count to 42, but imagine multiplying what we just sat through. And imagine starting every day waiting for the tool that you are required to use to boot up. So I asked how it got that bad, and I was told it was years of neglect for what was such an obvious problem that had real business implications and costs associated to it. But it never got prioritized until it was too late, and then it took a year plus to rebuild the whole thing. So when I talk about our process, it's a lot of focus in making sure we deliver on the user promise, on the actual benefits, because all of these sentiments are anti-users, which is the exact opposite of what we're trying to do. We're not trying to build products for ourselves. We're not trying to create a false narrative of how our product is contributing to the business. And we are certainly not trying to just add things to our product instead of auditing what is working and what it's not. So that leads us here, that killing products, as much as we can justify keeping something around that fits the reason we have identified, it is essential to keep ourselves from burdening and maintaining something that is not contributing to our success. And listen, we're in good company. This happens across the board. Let's take a look at a couple examples. On the left, we have Instagram, who ended up hiding the likes on their posts because they said it was contributing to negative behaviors on platform. In the middle, Netflix, they had this sort of shuffle or randomizer button called Surprise Me, and they acknowledged that users were just not using it because they had other ways of discovery. And in my own company, there was a full launch product, CNN Plus, that just did not match when a merger happened, how the new leadership was investing in projects and didn't see the value of a standalone news app. And Google, of course, is known for this. They have a great site called Killed by Google. They've killed 285 products and counting. And they think about this methodically. It's math. They look at putting things into the market, seeing what happens. And if it works, great. If it doesn't, they get rid of it. Because what you're trying to do with this is make decisions that are based on a risk-reward calculation. You're aligning yourself. And this is really difficult, especially if leadership doesn't have a singular vision in mind. But our products need to ladder up to our goals, our objectives. So if it's not crystal clear on what we're trying to accomplish, it can be really challenging to see if our product is delivering on that. We need to look at our user needs. We need to understand what's working, what's not working, and maybe take a minute and pause and try to validate whether their problems are laddering up to our product objectives. Is our product health being impacted by this? Do we need to understand how jamming more in will affect degraded user experiences or performance? And perhaps the last, this idea of our value prop. Now, don't get me wrong, I love a surprise and delight feature. I think it's a great way for differentiation in the space. But if we're focusing purely on novelty features and not on critical components, it increases engagement for the short term, but can cause long-term health growth issues. So when you're doing this, I ask a couple questions, specifically the ones in purple I think are great. which is you want to get your team in a room and honestly discuss these. And as often as you're looking at your roadmap, you should be looking at your product set and evaluating whether these are servicing your OKRs. So ask yourself, is it more expensive than is worth the user? Are we encouraging the bad behavior? Is it stopping us from doing something more meaningful? And really, can you defend this decision to keep to executives? If no, the answer is kill it, get it off your plate. Because the longer you wait, the harder it is. And this is an uncomfortable conversation, but it needs to be addressed because things are built on top of it, processes and workflows are put in place, and that experience becomes accepted. And next thing you know, it's really difficult to untangle. So how do you do this? Well, one idea is you incorporate it into your existing prioritization mechanisms. So for example, take the Kano model. It's a great way to bucket concepts into basic expectations, satisfiers, delighters. It allows you to take an audit of your existing feature sets and put it into these buckets. Well, take it, reverse it. You can exactly take the same model, but label basic expectations, displeasures, and offenders. And if you look at that based on what you have already supported in your product, it's a great way to prioritize feature sets to consider to remove. All you're trying to do is clear your plate of things that are not contributing, that are causing issues for performance that your users don't want, don't need, and have no interest in using. So you've made this bold, brave decision to kill off something. Congratulations. It is necessary in order to maintain progress. And if you do it, here's a couple ways for you to think about it. Number one is perspective. Now that you don't have to take care of this thing that isn't helping you, what can you do instead? You're arguably Marie Kondoing your product here. What brings you joy? What brings your users joy? What don't you have to support anymore that made you sad or made your users sad? Be real about it, admit risks, but this is ultimately a time for you to reflect on what's possible and the opportunities that are there for your product now. And as you think through this, here are a couple things to keep an eye on. Do you see increased speed, less bugs, time saved? These are all really valuable metrics that back up the benefit of killing something. And from the consumer side, you might see things like positive sentiment or NPS scores, happiness increase. Engagement would be even greater to see, specifically among those that were plagued by that issue the most. And those are all good signs that killing was the right way to go. 2, planning. Depending on the type of business you're in, you'll employ one of these 3 techniques. I work primarily in direct-to-consumer B2C, so I tend to do cold turkey and just turn it off. If it's a really big feature, I may consider weaning it a little bit, turning it off maybe 10% at a time, see what the reactions are. You'll see in the numbers, take off 10%, then 30%, then 50%, etc. For those who work in more of a B2B organization, you may want to give advance notice to your clients about the change, explain why it's happening, how this will impact their process, and do your best to make the transition as seamless as possible. And number 3, make peace with this. Use this space as a reflection of what you learned from both not only the technology side, but the user side. Document things like users didn't know what to do with this. The value prop got diluted by bigger companies. The cost of entry was too high. Whatever the reason may be, and circulate it. Make sure everyone knows the real reason to prevent someone else from making the same mistake or even you making the same mistake over again. I once worked on a product that I thought was a great idea that looked eerily similar to one I killed 2 years before. Reorient yourself about why you're there. These are all goals that are intended to give you a guide to success. Use them as jumpstart points to start thinking critically about what you need to offer for your users. So I know we ran through that very quickly, 15 minutes, but here's a handy one-sheeter to take with you as you begin the conversations with your team about how to integrate the killing mindset as part of your team culture. Number 1, remove emotion. It is a rational, data-driven, and user-driven decision. So it's not about you or your great ideas. It's about what's best for your users. Number 2, as you add, audit. Every time you consider what you should prioritize next, think about if you can remove something as part of that. Your product should focus on a finite amount of really well-executed concepts, not just supporting a bunch of half-baked ideas. 3, normalize the process, share learnings, admit failures, talk openly about how to get rid of the bulk it is celebrated. And lastly, reflect this and document it. As you make changes, document it and why. With these first steps, you'll be on the path to focus for intent-driven product development that will result in the best user experience for your users. I'm Stephanie Musat. Thank you very much for your time.